Hey, everybody. It's been a while. It's Romania Black, and I just spit tea everywhere. That straw just was a bad decision. So, we're on episode 6 of Heaven Official's Blessing, season 2 of the Donghua, and yeah, it's been a while. These 2 weeks have felt like an eternity. These 2 weeks have felt like 800 years. They really have. These 2 weeks have felt like so long, but I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I needed these 2 weeks. My channel got really busy. I got really busy over the holiday break here in the US, and I was just like, I need more time. And so honestly, it came at a good moment for me to have 2 weeks off to catch up with other things. But, you know, the other day I was like, I'm starting to get like an itch. I want some more Heaven Official's Blessing. And so thank goodness the episode is out now. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have been waiting. So I have comments. They're going to have to wait till the spoiler corner. But I have gone back and I have read everybody's comments leading up to episode 5. And now we're on episode 6 of season 2. I've just missed this show. It's so good. And it just reminds me that once the season's over, we're going to have a long time to wait before season 3. Sad days. But I am super excited for this series. I really cannot wait. I am so looking forward to it. And I've just waited all day at work. And I know I've been trying to stay out of the Discord to be like, everybody's watching the new episode, but I just want to see it. So that's where we're at. So I'm super, super excited, y'all, to get back into the series and watch. We left off at a pretty good time where seemingly Xie Lian has confessed that he basically massacred Lan Chanshu's family. And we're all like, wait, what? Xie Lian, you're a sweet cinnamon bun. You massacred a family, excuse me? We gonna get some more explanation about this? So, we are back. The Wind Master brought back the Earth Master. They've been taken to recuperate somewhere. Long Ying, the kid, is up there with everybody. They've been taken aside for a moment. So, things are all just kind of up in the air. What is Junwoo gonna do about Xie Lian? What's gonna happen? We just left off without knowing the details. So, I feel we should know these things. I feel these things should be let be known to us. So that's what's going to happen. So I'm really excited. I want to give a very quick shout out over to Patreon, over to the philanthropy tier. Not only to Patreon who supports me, you guys are amazing, but also to the philanthropy tier who donate a little extra each month. Y'all are wonderful. And so I want to give a special shout out to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Anna, to Ash Got No Bitches, to Be Happy, to Dana, to Destiny Marie, to Edgar, to Eric, to Kiri, to Matthew Palfinier, to Nameless Monster, to Sunspots, to Shimoyama, to Trails, to Translucent Men, to Tyrone, to Zachiel, to Lyndon, to Jimmy, Lujan, to AkuQ, to Lexi McDaniel, as well as Danger Zone, who is the new one to be added. So I'm gonna, every time Danger Zone, if you stay in the philanthropy tier, I'm gonna say your name like that. So I hope that's okay. But I'm so excited to be back. I'm ready to dive into this episode. It's only 22 minutes, but I'm trying not to complain. By the time you take out the OP, though, it's like 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, show. You tease us with that 31-minute episode 1, and then you just slowly descend into less and less. Curses foiled again. So we'll just have to see what happens this episode. I've been staying off of Twitter, aka X. I've been staying off lots of things. I've just been trying my best to not be spoiled till I watch it. So, in any case, we're going to start episode 6 of Heaven Official's Blessing, see what we get, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Ah, y'all. It feels so good to be back to Heaven Official's Blessing. It feels so good! I know we will have a spoiler corner, and those of you that are Donghua only, we'll talk about that stuff then, but oh my god, this is a great way to go back into the episode. I feel like a lot of stuff happened this episode, but we really didn't traverse over a lot of ground. We literally went from the Great Martial Hall to the little Palace of Shanla that Xie Lian has up there in the Heavenly Realm, through a portal on the wings of silver butterflies, As Hua Cheng whisks him away, and then they end up in the forest together, and that's literally where it stops. So we didn't cover a lot of technical ground this episode, but we did go over a lot of things. So that's really exciting. So we need to just talk about this episode straightforward and go through it, right? Oh my gosh. I've missed the OP and the ED. They're so good. I love them. They're absolutely amazing. So let's talk about this episode. Let's just dive right in, shall we? First and foremost, it is so weird to me to see Xie Lian in like anything but white. To see him in like the blue robes and it's got like black and purple and red underneath. It feels so weird to see Xie Lian like in these other clothes. It doesn't feel like him. But the episode translates it to Imperial Preceptor. In the book, he's called the Goshi, and I just like calling him the Goshi. That to me is like, that's what I call him. So if I say Goshi in the discussion reactions, that's what I'm referring to, the Imperial Preceptor. It's less of a mouthful, essentially. But what I like about this is that, you know, it shows Xie Lian in a different light. He is old. Xie Lian is 800 years old. So even though he's this cute little, like, adorable scrap collector cinnamon bun, he's basically an old man. I've said in the novel reactions he reminds me a lot of Doctor Who, and he does. But I like that we see this other side of Xie Lian. Now, whether it's Xie Lian's actual personality that was like that at the time, or whether, and he's just softened and mellowed over however many hundreds of years it's been since this, we don't know for sure. Or if he was putting on airs trying to pretend to be a teacher, we don't know for sure either. So, but it is interesting to see Xie Lian be a different person in this case, right? I will say, I talked about this with Paradise Manor, but how I imagined this scene with Lan Chanchu and Xie Lian is not like this. I imagine them in like this big palace and these big like throne rooms, or like the educational hall would be this big fancy to do. That's how I imagined it. But of course, I'm influenced more by Western architecture and Western designs. This felt very Modao Zushi. This whole opening scene with him and Lan Chanchu, it felt very Modao Zushi in a good way. And also like Modao Zushi, I will say, I feel as if Xie Lian and Lan Wangji would get along very well. I do. I feel like they get along very well. I think they would really get along, especially in their teaching styles. Like when he gives Lan Chanchu all the lines to write, Lan Chanchu's like, anything but this. Let me go out and play. And Xie Lian's like, not till you write it 20 times. That's such a Lan Wangji strategy. I'm like, yes, they would totally get along. I feel like Lan Chanchu kind of reminds me of Sishui a little bit, like in terms of being like the kid that Xie Lian's taking care of, or that he's taken under his wing, so to speak. But I like that. And we see Xie Lian kind of wistfully looking out the window and telling him to do things. Also, his mask looks like a butterfly. I'm just saying, his mask looks like a butterfly. Pure coincidence? Who knows? I wish I knew what Xie Lian was reading, but I guess that doesn't matter. And then Lan Chanchu wants him to teach him a new sword technique. And he's like, well, have you mastered the other ones? And he's like, yes. And so he asks him, I want you to teach me the technique that you've used to save me. And what I like about this, it's interesting because it points out two things. One, it shows that Xie Lian, he's like, oh no, you don't need to learn this technique because it's something, he frames it by saying, you know, it's something that could hurt you and you're going to be the king of Yong'an. You don't need to know a technique that could hurt you. You're supposed to be the king. Others are probably going to throw their lives on the line to defend you. But it also points out something about Xie Lian that is a running trend since season 1. And that is that Xie Lian constantly puts himself in danger. Xie Lian constantly puts himself in situations where he hurts himself. And you're like, Xie Lian, what are we doing? Because he's like, oh no, you don't want to do this technique. It causes all the pain and suffering to go onto you. You don't want that. But Lan Chanchu kind of points out, he's like, well, but you're hurting yourself. And it's like, yes, he is. And that's a problem, right? Xie Lian's hurting himself. And it's like, but Xie Lian acts like it's no big deal. And it's like, but it is a big deal, right? And it'll get brought up again in this episode as we go. So Xie Lian points out this question. He says, if there were two people in front of you fighting each other and a third person appears and tries to stop the fight, how do you think it would end? And we see the three people with the swords drawn on the piece of paper. Which is Lan Chanchu just drawing people sword fighting instead of writing down the scriptures, like a kid would do. But he's like, okay, if two people are fighting, should a third person intervene? And Lan Chanchu is like, well, I don't know how it would end because the two people, they're probably going to fight each other. He's like, I don't think that trying to stop them wouldn't work. They're hungry. They're going to fight each other until one side wins. And he's like, yes. Xie Lian says, lecturing isn't going to create food to solve the problem. So if you want to end the conflict, the third person can only share his own food with the two. So again, that kind of ties back to Xie Lian's notion of hurting himself. He's like, oh, well, if two people are fighting over food, then you just give him, the third party arrives and you just give him your food and that will solve the problem. Or so it seems, which kind of sounds like Xie Lian, what he's doing is like, oh, well, I'll help. I'll just solve the problem. But then it's like, well, that leaves the third person hungry. So what about them, And that kind of ties to Xie Lian's mentality of he doesn't care for if it hurts him, as long as it helps the others. It's a very self-sacrificial move, right? It's very self-sacrificial. And he explains how the move would take the force of something. And now we know that Hua Cheng realized that Xie Lian was hurting himself by getting in the middle of their sword fight. And that'll come up later. He's like, the third person takes the brunt of the attack. He's like, you don't need to learn a technique like that. And so then Lan Chanchu stops. And he says, what if the third person doesn't have enough food? Like, you gave us your food. If the third person gave the other two parties food, what about them? What's going to happen with them? If those two people have food, but out of greed, they want more and become more aggressive, then they'll keep demanding from the third person. What do you do then? And Xie Lian just kind of like stares like, well, what do you think? Almost like Xie Lian doesn't have an answer. He's like, well, what do you think should happen if that occurs? And Lan Chanchu's like, well, I don't know, but maybe they shouldn't have intervened from the beginning. And then we cut to Xie Lian in this hall with the massacre with the black sword that looks like the black sword from the OP, right? And him going up to the king and the queen. It's so weird seeing them animated. I've wanted to see some of the stuff animated for a long time, like a year now, and it's like, oh, we're finally getting to this. And he takes the sword out and he stabs the king. Now, of course, the question here is, did Xie Lian, they see Lan Chanchu coming. The question is, did Xie Lian cause this massacre? Because his robes are pretty intact and they're pretty clean, right? His robes are pretty clean. They don't look like he's been battling a giant battle with all these people. So the question is, did he fight all these people? It doesn't seem like it. But then what happened? Who killed the queen? Why did he stab the king? That's the big question on our minds, right? Why did he go through and do this? And do it specifically when Lan Chanchu came into the room. So maybe we'll find out. We don't know. But the point is that Lan Chanchu saw him kill his father. And this part was so sad. Like seeing Xie Lian just walk past him. Xie Lian just walked past without saying a word. Without saying a word, walking past him. And poor Lan Chanchu. The animation of Lan Chanchu grabbing at his mother's robes, grabbing at her bleeding, cold body. Oh my God, that was so horrible. It's so sad. And then, yeah, his family dying and Xie Lian sheathing the sword. And of course, we do the fake out. Of course, Xie Lian says something and then walks away and has the blood on him. Of course, then we cut back to the beginning. We cut back to the present where he's like, I want to duel Xie Lian. And so then, of course, I love the spectators are just all like gossiping amongst themselves. Like as this tense moment is happening, they're like, well, how's this going to turn out? Well, who knows? And they're like, back in the day, the emperor, now they bring up some like little chunks of exposition that get thrown about here in this moment that you're like, wait, what? And one of them is that the emperor is quite fond of Xie Lian, which we've seen that the emperor seems to be very nice towards Xie Lian. That seems to be apparent. And they're like, well, that was only for the beginning. Things changed after the Second Ascension. They had a fight, didn't they? Yes, and Shanla stabbed the emperor several times. there must be a grudge there. And then somebody is like, but look, he built him a new palace in the prime location of the heavenly capital. If you had a grudge, why would you do that? And they're like, oh, well, it's because of Prince Shanla's powerful backing. And Junwoo just staring down at Xie Lian, like, the daddy energy rating off Junwoo is like... So, yeah. So, interestingly enough, everybody's like, well, Xie Lian and the Emperor supposedly had this big fight back then, but they seem on pretty good terms now, which they do. And Xie Lian told Sanlong back during the OVA, he's like, no, the Emperor was just punishing me. We got in this fight. He's punishing me. It's why I have this shackle on me. It's fine. I deserved it for what I did. We don't know all the details there, but it seems like they left on mutual terms, that after they got done fighting, they left on mutual terms and Xie Lian accepted his punishment. So it's like, we don't know all the details, but the gossip is kind of like, well, what is their past? And we don't entirely know the full story yet. But Xie Lian has a request. He wants to get demoted. He wants to not be ascended anymore. I want to go back to the mortal life. And I like Mu Ching over in the corner is like Mu Ching's like, really? And then Lan Chanshu is like, well, I love that Lan Chanshu said ascension is your talent. He's like, I love that Lan Chanshu basically says, he's like, well, that's stupid. Even if you descend, you're just going to ascend right back again. It's happened 3 times now. He's not wrong, right? So, but the idea that Xie Lian would descend again and be like, I don't want any of this. It's fine. Xie Lian just wants to run away from the problem. And like, I don't want to explain anymore. Just forget about me. I'm fine. It's just, he's trying to punish himself all over again. Again, remove himself from the equation, right? Which goes back to that story you talked to Lan Chanshu about in the room. So yeah. And I'm like, everybody's like, really? Is that what we're going to do? And like, Lan Chanshu says ascension is your talent. And he's like, you fought me before. And the way that Xie Lian's like, if I fight you now, you're going to lose. I love the way Xie Lian says that. It is so calm and collected and confident. He's like, you're not going to beat me. Like, just, because even though Xie Lian has his powers restricted, the idea he could still beat Lan Chanshu is terrifying. Like, how strong is Xie Lian? We don't know, right? He's like, you would lose. And he's like, and Lan Chanshu still wants to do it. And that's when the Windmaster steps up. I love the Windmaster's like, bestie, I am not going to let you get demoted. You are not sitting in coach. You are going to go first class on this flight, sir. I feel like the Windmaster is that friend that's like, did you not see this Groupon for first class? You're settling for coach? Are you kidding me? Like, I feel like business class isn't good enough, Xie Lian. I love the Windmaster because they are that friend that is so supportive of Xie Lian. They're like, I'm not going to settle for you having anything less than the best. I love the Windmaster and their whisk when they were just like flipping it around the whole time. It was so freaking cute. And so the Windmaster brings up a good point. They're like, why would Xie Lian spare Lan Chanshu? If he was trying to destroy the royal family, why not kill Lan Chanshu? And why spare him now in the present? If that was his goal, then why not just go through with it? You had the opportunity. And I love that Pei Ming just decides to just roll on up. It's like, oh, are you having a calm, cool conversation? Pei Ming's like, but did you think about this? And you're like, why are you here? I can't help it. Pei Ming's voice actor has such a smooth voice. Oh, it's amazing. And of course, we know that Pei Ming and the Windmaster don't necessarily like each other. So of course, Pei Ming's like, well, I just wanted to come up and just bring up my descendant again. And Windmaster's like, are you still on about that? Didn't we settle this matter already? I love that Pei Ming is still not over his descendant getting reprimanded and caught by the Windmaster. He's not over it. He's still dragging the dead horse. And Windmaster's like, we're talking about Xie Lian now, not your descendant. So let's pump the brakes. I just love it. I love that the Windmaster is just so over Pei Ming and him trying to like butt in and get things riled up. And I like that Xie Lian's like, thank you, Windmaster, for standing up for me and for understanding. But it's not necessary. And then Junwoo's like, let's all just calm down. There was definitely the vibes where when Jun Woo, there was definitely the vibes when Jun Woo was like, look, we don't have all the evidence. I'm going to personally interrogate Xie Lian. I remember reading the novel and getting this distinct vibe that there was something kind of like I'm going to personally interrogate him myself. Like that, one of those vibes. It felt like that. And it was like, oh, okay. There was kind of like a sexual vibe to it in the novel. Here, it doesn't read so much, but, and I like that everybody's like, okay. And he's like, look, we'll settle this later and I'll interrogate him. And until then, and I like when Master's like, yes, good. Now Xie Lian can't descend. He can't go back to being a commoner. My bestie is not going to, he deserves the country club food. And Xie Lian, he thanks him, and then Lan Chu's like, I will engage in a life or death battle with you at some point. So Xie Lian asks the Windmaster to do two things. They are both hilarious. One, and I like MXTX covers their ground. There's like, okay, one, I hid this kid here. Can you babysit him? Windmaster's like, sure, I can watch this kid. Of course not. And then the other thing is like, okay, I also have this other kid in a pickle jar. Can you go like let her out for some fresh air? And the Windmaster's like, a pickle jar, huh? Okay. I just imagine the Windmaster as a babysitter, being that babysitter that just gives Long Ying and Banyu like a bunch of chocolate and sugar and lets them get on this giant sugar high. And then he brings them back to Xie Lian and he's like, okay, they're done. And they're all just like bouncing off the wall. And Xie Lian's like, what'd you do? And he's like, I babysat. Like, I feel like the Windmaster is not the type to have kids, but to spoil kids. Like that, they totally have like best uncle vibe ever. Or like from Mean Girls, I'm a cool mom. That's the Windmaster vibes, and I love it. But kudos for MXTX not forgetting about them and taking care of them and having the Windmaster watch over them. It's great. So yeah, and Xie Lian's like, if you have time, go to the Puji Shrine and do this. The Windmaster's like, oh, the Puji Shrine. I feel like the Windmaster would get to the Puji Shrine and be like, we need to spruce this place up. This is not good enough for my bestie. So then Xie Lian walks away and we get to see the Windmaster looking concerned. Function. Can we talk about Function for a minute? They are animated so well in this second season. Like the thick brows, they look very manly. They have like the thick brows, the concerned eyes. They look so concerned for Xie Lian. And then Mooching's just like, I feel like it's cats and dogs. Mooching is a cat for sure. Mooching's that cat on the edge of the table just going, and knocks the water bottle up, the water bowl off, and you're like, why'd you do that? And the cat's like, whatever. Like that's Mooching. And then Function is like a dog that's just like, can I help you? Can I do things? Yes, please. Sure. Like, and of course that's why they fight so much, because they're literally fighting like cats and dogs. That's Function and Mooching in a nutshell. So yeah. I do think it's very melancholy that Xie Lian goes back to the palace and everything is exactly like it was when he was younger, because he ascended, 800 years ago, and we know that the kingdom of Shanla is no more. So this is like very nostalgic for him, but it's kind of melancholy too, because it's kind of like is what he's lost from long ago. He's like, well, this is exactly like it was. I would feel very weirded out if I was in a palace like this and I'm like, oh, this is just exactly like I left it. I don't know how I'd feel about it, right? I guess you could look at it as being sweet and a sweet gesture, but there is something kind of melancholy about it. And of course, Xie Lian is sitting there. He could reminisce about his past. He could reminisce about his family. He could reminisce about anything, but what does he think of? San Long. Thinks about his man friend and how he burnt up everything in the armory at Paradise Manor and how Hua Cheng looks sad. And Xie Lian's like, I'm going to have to, like, when I descend and I'm no longer heavenly official, I'm going to have to give up everything. It says even my own beloved Paradise Manor, but I think they meant the Pushi Shrine. I think he's going to have to give up the shrine. And he's like, I'm going to have to work for San Long for centuries to make it up. I'm sure that if you do certain things, Xie Lian, you could pay off that debt real quick. I'm just saying. But then he's like, maybe I could go see him. And he shakes the dice and they both get snake eyes. Which he's like, all my luck is gone. So here's another thing. Back in the novel, and this isn't a spoiler because we've watched the episode now. Back in the novel, I imagined, again, how everything was laid out in my head feels different than how it is here. I felt like Mu Qing and Feng Shen, in my head in the novel, they didn't make it to the inside of the Shanla Palace. They were all of their fighting and disputing happened right outside the gates. And then Hua Cheng showed up and was like, yoink, bye, and whisked Xie Lian away. But here it happens, the big fight starts inside the palace, which is fine. Mu Qing is very interesting. Mu Qing is a absolute tsundere. He wants to know what Xie Lian's up to, but he gives him the medicine to heal his hand. Mu Qing cares, which is, Mu Qing cares about Xie Lian, but he's like a tsundere. He doesn't want to show it. He's like, I guess you could heal your hand with this. I guess, whatever. He's just very off-put by it. Meanwhile, and he tries to play it out being like, well, I showed up first. Who even knows if Feng Shen's going to show up? And then Feng Shen, of course, shows up and the two of them duke it out. And it's like, WTF. I did feel like the mystical fluid, it was like a Modao Zushi healing technique, which could be in a lot of Chinese fantasy. I don't know. It felt like something reminiscent of Modao Zushi, like I've seen it on that Donghua. But here's the thing. Mu Qing cares about Xie Lian, gives him the medicine, but then he wants something in return. He's like, okay, I healed your hand. Now, answer my question. Did you really kill that family? How did you do that? And then that's when Feng Shen shows up and he's like, what are you doing here? I was just about to get answers. And Feng Shen asks the exact same thing. And Xie Lian's like, yeah, I did kill them. He's like, they're true. I killed them. He's like, yep, every word I said in the Hall of Shenwu or Junwu is true. And Feng Shen looks so distraught. He's just like, oh, well, what do you mean you killed them? And Mu Qing's like, I don't know. He's like, and then he gets on to Feng Shen. He's like, oh, spare us your solemn act for acting all like sad for Xie Lian. He's like, why are you putting on this face? And Feng Shen gets mad. And he's like, I'm not for you. I'm certainly not for you. And he tells Mu Qing to leave. And Mu Qing's like, why are you telling me to leave? He's like, and he basically calls Feng Shen out and says he's not being sincere. And they go into this argument. I love Xie Lian's like, ladies, you're both pretty. Please stop. Don't fight in front of my salad. Please stop fighting in this palace. And he says, you think you're righteous, but it's all just excuses. And he's like, you just don't want to waste your time on a useless person. And that's when he gets punched. And then it just goes all out, right? And Xie Lian's like, what the hell? What is happening? And they just start fighting. And I like that Xie Lian's like, man, he basically notes that they both are like two animals. And we see, I guess, is it a jackal and a leopard? There's like a cheetah or a leopard and then what looks like maybe a jackal, I guess. Is that the case? I like that Xie Lian's like, man, back in the day, Mu Qing wouldn't have been so loud. And Feng Shen, when I told him to stop, he'd stop. But these kids grow up fast. I'm like, they're the same age as you. That's the part that gets me. I'm like, Xie Lian, they're the same age as you. You treat them like little kids. I'm like, come on, Xie Lian, what are we doing? What are we doing? And that is when this magical gate shows up. The moment you see the butterflies, it's like, you know who it is. Only one person in the story uses butterflies. And I love that Mu Qing and Feng Shen are like, Your Highness, don't, the butterflies, they're going to attack you. And Xie Lian's like, but it's so cute. Only Xie Lian. There's these butterflies like destroying Mu Qing and Feng Shen. And Xie Lian's like, but they're so sweet. And then they're like, don't touch that thing. And he just gets whisked away on the wings of butterflies to the gate opening. And then, yeah, censorship be damned. I love that he just like grabs him by the wrist and like puts the hand over the waist. And he's like, hello, Xie Lian. It's me again, Margaret. And it's like, love it. Love it. Just keep that hand on there as long as you want. And Hua Cheng, he's like, so long. Like, how dare you? And I like that Feng Shen says that Xie Lian's been kidnapped by Hua Cheng. And Mu Qing's like, he didn't get kidnapped. He went with him. Which is kind of both. On the one hand, yes, Hua Cheng showed up seemingly to take Xie Lian away, which is kidnapping. But on the other hand, Xie Lian didn't fight him at all. He was just like, oh, okay. So he kind of did do both. He went with him and was kidnapped. So neither of them are truly wrong. And I love that Hua Cheng's like, he's like, come and get him. He's like, see if you can come and get me. I'm like, ah! If a giant supreme ghost king showed up with butterflies and drug me away, I'd be like, okay. I love that he's like dragging Xie Lian by his sleeve, being like, let's go, let's get out of here. And so then there's the spiritual ray, right? Basically the DM server where they all go. And they're talking about Xie Lian escaping. And I like that the Windmaster's like, well, why'd you guys let this happen? And then everybody's gossiping, and all of a sudden, Hua Cheng shows up, and he's like, hey, anybody want to challenge me or come find me? And everybody in the race slowly turns around like, nope, we don't want to fight you, sorry. I love that all Hua Cheng has to do is pop in and go, hey, any of you want to fight me to come get him? They're like, take him. He was going to demote himself anyway. I love it. I freaking love it. And so then, yeah, they're back in the woods. And he tells Xie Lian to come with him. Now, where to? We don't know. Why has Hua Cheng come and got him? We don't know. But again, he holds out that hand just like he did in season 1. And he's like, and Xie Lian is like, oh, well. And then I like that on here, we can see that Hua Cheng, he didn't grab Xie Lian's actual skin, his hand. He grabbed the sleeve of his robe. And Xie Lian thinks back to when on the wagon, when he grabbed San Long's hand while he was in his teenage form, San Long didn't like that. So Xie Lian's like, he notices that Hua Cheng does not like touching him. And that he doesn't seem to touch him, right? When he holds him, he always has his hand on clothing. There's no like skin to skin contact. So it's like, well, why isn't that? But he doesn't seem to want to do it. We don't know why. But Xie Lian, I like the idea that Xie Lian is trying to rationalize all this. And he thinks that he feels so bad for burning down Paradise Manor. And he's like, has Hua Cheng come to like hold me accountable? Has he come asking me to take responsibility? And what I like about that MXTX does here is that she gets rid of the miscommunication trope. She says, look, these characters clearly need to talk it out. They need to rehash what happened back at the manor. And then she actually lets them do it. She's like, has Xie Lian go, I'm sorry. He's like, I didn't mean. And of course, Hua Cheng is like, why are you saying sorry? And he's like, well, because I burned, he's like, you've always been so open with me and honest. And I hid the fact that we took the Earthmaster away and I deceived you. He's like, you treated me with kindness, but I burned down your Paradise Manor. And I love that both of them, if you watch their gestures, they both like clench their fists as they're talking. Like they both feel like such guilt, but resolve to talk about it. He's like, your armory filled with priceless treasures. I was fully ready for Hua Cheng to be like, the only priceless treasure is you, Xie Lian. Like, I was just ready for it. But he's like, I burnt down all your pretty swords. He's like, I feel guilty. And then he says, but once I'm done being demoted, I'll find a way to compensate you. He's like, let me see how I can do that. And Hua Cheng's like, why? And I love that he has his fist clenched and he's like, you don't understand. He's like, and then he like comes right at Xie Lian. He's like, why would you compensate me? He's like, I was the one who injured you. And I was like, we've never seen Hua Cheng this soft before. And I was like, like just seeing how they animated it. Oh my God. Cause he's like, it was me who hurt you, not the other way around. He's like, I struck you and caused that injury to your arm. And Xie Lian's like, oh, well, my arm's all right. It's all fine. But again, going back to that conversation with Lan Chu, it's that idea that Xie Lian hurt himself. And Hua Cheng doesn't like that. And Xie Lian's just like, it's okay. I got it healed up somehow. But that's not the point, right? And Hua Cheng, the way he looks at him, he's like, look, he's like, I can still move it. He's like, I caused you this serious injury. Why can you smile and apologize to me? I hurt you. Isn't that bad? Why are you talking about compensating me? And Xie Lian's like, oh, well, it was my decision to confront and get injured. It's not your fault. And just the way that Hua Cheng's eye is like shimmering, it's like clearly Hua Cheng feels bad because he hurt Xie Lian. And Xie Lian's like, oh, it's nothing. It was my decision. But Hua Cheng's really sad about it. And he turns around, and as he turns and walks away, of course he has a shadow under his face, and Xie Lian looks down and then notices that Aming, like the sword is trembling. And Aming is just sitting there with his little eye, like looking like he's about to cry. these two boys, these two men, these grown-ass men, just like they're so upset that they hurt one another. Xie Lian's trying to play it off like it's nothing, but it's clearly not nothing. It's like, oh, I have spoilers that I want to talk about. Not a crazy amount of spoilers, but spoilers I want to talk about. But I really, really liked this episode a lot. I'm so excited to see where we go to from here. I haven't read the novels over again because I want to be surprised when we get to certain parts, because I can vaguely remember where we're going, but not exactly how we get there. So it'll be a fun time next week, but Heaven Official's blessing, you're back. I am so happy. Yes, please. So I'm going to talk spoilers here shortly. So if you're not sticking around for those, I hope you all enjoyed this reaction discussion. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next week for more of Heaven Official's blessing. So, I got some comments that I want to talk about. As we go back through this. I am so excited to have these episodes animated. It's great to see some of this content animated. Again, Xie Lian as the Goshi with the butterfly mask. I'm like, how not subtle are we at all, show? I think what's interesting about, and we'll talk about the comments I've got here in a second. I think what's interesting about this is that I do think it's so crazy to see the Goshi now, to see Mei Nianqing, and to see Xie Lian trying to be a Goshi himself, and to see how he kind of tried to portray that same air as Mei Nianqing. But Mei Nianqing is very much like an uncle/uncle-in-law vibe that just, you know, Mei Nianqing feels like an old teacher. That's just how his air is. And Xie Lian does not give off that vibe, even when he's being stern, and even when he's 300 years younger in this flashback. It's also very weird to see him in the blue and red robes. Also, someone for last episode in the comments was talking about Xie Lian being like, man, that ghost whatever thing in the one flashback, it was all dressed in white, like kind of like Xie Lian. Like, are they the same thing? And I was like, I was like, ah! I feel like you all now. I was internally screaming, going, oh, what do I say? What do I say? Lies! I've got to lie! And I was just like, yeah, who knows? Crazy. I'm glad that they're figuring it out as well. I'm glad. Knowing there are some Donghua only people watching this, and so seeing them in the comments be like, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm like, oh, you have no idea. It's so crazy. I feel like you all, I'm like, you guys have no clue it's coming. And I'm so excited. It's just, it's so wonderful, right? But we go back to the idea. It's so crazy that we go back to the idea of the third party. And Xie Lian retells the 2 cup story to Lan Chanshu, but rephrases it a little bit. And what's so interesting is now looking back, it's like Xie Lian was trying to be that third party to intervene and give themselves up to save the other 2 parties, right? Kind of like, as we're learning now in the novel, I'm almost to the end of volume 7, almost. Now that we're learning about it, it's like we see that Junwoo was trying to do that too. Junwoo was trying to be the third party to take the brunt of everything and self-sacrifice and save the others. And it didn't work for Junwoo, and it didn't work for Xie Lian. And the moment that Lan Chanshu's like, well, what if the people get greedy and hungry and take everything from the third party and leave them with nothing? Then it's almost like they shouldn't have intervened from the start. And we've seen that time and time again. We saw that with Junwoo in the bridge. It crashed with Wuyong. We saw Xie Lian try to do it with Shanla, and it crashed and failed. And then we tried to see him do it again at Yong'an and try to stop the Gilded Banquet and be the third party to take the brunt of the blame. And it ended up not solving the problem. So it ended up just hurting everybody. So it's so cool to see that third cup, that the 2 cups story being brought back up again, and Xie Lian trying to do what the Goshi did before. Although I would imagine if Mei Nianqing, now that we know he had no clue that Xie Lian was the Goshi of Yong'an, he's like, that was you? You messed that up? just it's so funny to see him just be like, really? What'd I teach you? It's great. I'm also wondering if the black sword that he had in this was the same sword that was the one that stabbed him back with Bai Wusheng. Is that the same sword? It's a long black sword. So is that the same one that Bai Wusheng stabbed him with at the temple? If it is, the fudge? Are you kidding me? What? Also, I like seeing the animated versions of the King and Queen. That's all. Now it all makes sense. Seeing it animated, you can kind of piece together all the parts of Qirong's story and Xie Lian's that come up. I'm just going to go ahead and forewarn you, when Qirong shows up, which I don't think it's going to happen next episode. Rule of 8, y'all. Rule of mother trucking 8. I don't think it's happening next episode. I think next episode we're going to go into the mines. We're going to become the little ghost sprites. We're going to see all that. And I think at the very end of the episode, we're going to meet Qirong. But then episode 8 is going to be Qirong. Rule of mother trucking 8. And I'm going to tell you all right now that if that happens, episode 8 is coming out on Christmas on Patreon. If Qirong shows up in episode 8 on Christmas Day, I am going to just freak the fudge out because I love Qirong so much. And I've been waiting to see him since I started reading the novel. Ever since I read that part of volume 2, I'm like, I want to see Qirong animated. I'm going to freak out. So I hope you all are ready. I hope you're ready. Because it's going to happen. I'm going to freak out. So yeah. So then, of course, we go back. We go back to the beginning. I was trying to remember what Xie Lian told Lan Chanshu in those words, but they're going to come back by the end of the season. So don't tell me. Don't remind me. We're going to find out at the end of the season. I'm sure it's going to come back to him, and those words are going to come out, right? Because we're going to find out about the Gilded Banquet from Xie Lian's perspective. But yeah, so we come back to Lan Chanshu, and everybody, now that we know, like, what that fight between Xie Lian and the Emperor was like, that it was basically just them agreeing to just get rid of Bai Wusheng and move on, and Xie Lian agreed to shackle himself. Now that makes sense. But I will tell you all, now that we know that Junwoo, Bai Wusheng, and the Prince of Wuyong are all the same person, seeing these moments with Junwoo just being like, it's like, and the idea that Junwoo is like, I'll personally interrogate him later. I'm like, oh my God. And the idea that the Shanla Palace is just exactly like Xie Lian left it. There is a creepy vibe to it. Like, I'm sure that the gesture, because again, Bai Wusheng took his family's remnants to the mausoleum. So there have been like gestures of seeming kindness done by Bai Wusheng and Junwoo, but there's always this air of like creepy toxicity under it. So there is kind of like a creepy layer of, it reminds me of Labyrinth when there's the little scrap collector goblin is trying to like make Sarah forget about her past and everything and forget about going home. And so the goblin like makes a replica of Sarah's bedroom and it has all the toys that her brother stole. And it's like, don't forget about your brother. Here's this beautiful room with all your toys. Just sit here and play with your toys. Forget about the brother. Forget about the baby. It's almost like Junwoo is creating this replica of the Palace of Shanla being like, forget about Hua Cheng. Forget about the mortal realm. Just stay here with me. And we can just pretend things were like they were in Shanla. It just gives off those vibes. I'm just saying. But yeah. And then now that we know everything that we do about Mu Qing and Feng Xin, every time I see Feng Xin and he looks so sad and he just looks at Xie Lian with such concern, oh my God. And we'll talk about the fight. The fight makes so much more sense now. It's like, oh, all these layers that you didn't know until you read later on. Then you go back and you're like, oh my God. Also, the Windmaster sticking up for Xie Lian. Love the Windmaster doing that. And then Pei Ming. God, I love this version of Pei Ming because it's pre-captain of the ship Pei Ming. In the novel, I was not having it with Pei Ming at this point. I was like, Pei Ming, how dare you? Get away from Xie Lian. That's right, Windmaster, you tell him off, whatever. And I'm sure people reacting to Donghua are like, didn't she hate him last season? But the thing about it is, once we get to Blackwater and once we get to all that, my tune will significantly change because then Pei Ming will be like, you and the Ghost King, or you guys have like something going on? Love it. Love it. So yeah. So Xie Lian goes, I feel like we skipped a scene. I feel like we skipped the interrogation. Is that true? I feel like, or was that the early, there's been a couple interrogation scenes between Junwoo and Xie Lian at the Great Martial Hall. So I sometimes forget which one is which. Either we skipped the interrogation where Junwoo was like, be careful again. I warned you. Don't touch that scimitar. And Xie Lian's like already done it. Or I'm thinking of back when he told him not to touch the scimitar before they went to the Ghost City. One of those two. I feel like we had skipped an interrogation, but maybe not. Maybe not. He maybe just sent Xie Lian. Maybe I'm thinking that I skipped Xie Lian walking down the heavenly realm, like the avenue, and getting to the palace. Maybe I'm thinking of that. In any case, I do love that they tied back and made sure the Windmaster knew about Banyu, knew about Long Ying, took care of the kids. I'm glad we went back to that. Good on it. But yeah, so then Xie Lian's like staring wistfully, thinking about, I'm really glad we've gotten as much with this series as we have, because from this point on, the book very much celebrates the romance between Xie Lian and Hua Cheng. And I was afraid going into this season that the Donghua was going to censor that a lot, but no, Xie Lian is whimsically going, oh, so long, like just whimsically calling out his name and being like, so long, and like going along with him. They are hiding nothing. It's amazing. And Hua Cheng like grabbing his waist and holding, hiding nothing, having it, here for it, like how concerned Hua Cheng is for Xie Lian, living for it. Thank you, Donghua. Thank you, Donghua team. Mwah. Love that. But yeah, so Xie Lian rolls the dice, but of course we know later that anytime Xie Lian rolls the dice, Hua Cheng is there. So didn't matter what he rolled, he was going to show up either way. So the whole thing with Mu Qing is rather interesting, because when Xie Lian was getting taken away back to the palace, Mu Qing and Feng Shen share a glance. Now these two have had this relationship with Xie Lian where they both abandoned Xie Lian. Bad things happened to Xie Lian. And now they both seem to kind of regret it. And they're trying to, in their own way, sort of ease their way back in to reconnect with Xie Lian. And they've used their disciples, which turned out to just be them, to try to do it earlier. And now they're in front of Xie Lian in their actual forms. Mu Qing is like a Cinderella cat. He really is. He like just is like, here's some medicine, I guess you could use it. And he's very passive aggressive, which after what he did to Xie Lian on top of that mountain, yeah, can't imagine why. And it seems like, but what's interesting is that Mu Qing still wants to know what's going on. He wants all that information. And then Feng Shen shows up. And then they get into the argument because Feng Shen's worried about Xie Lian. And he's having trouble believing that Xie Lian killed his family, which Feng Shen, when Xie Lian said he robbed from the guy, was kind of like upset about that and didn't want to believe it. But Mu Qing, Mu Qing knows that Xie Lian's capable. It's like Mu Qing and Feng Shen handle it different ways. When Xie Lian robbed the man, Mu Qing was just like, how dare you? Like, what? Why? And Feng Shen was like, well, you couldn't have done that. You're the crown prince. So they reacted kind of in polar opposite ways. And here, Feng Shen doesn't want to believe that Xie Lian's capable of killing the family. And Mu Qing's like, come on now. We've been down this road before. We know Xie Lian is not an innocent cinnamon roll. He's capable of doing some pretty horrible things. And I like that. I love Feng Shen's like, it's not for you. And he's like, get lost. And Mu Qing saying, who are you to tell me to get lost? How heartfelt were your words? And you couldn't endure a few more years and ran away by yourself, which now makes all the more sense because he's talking about when he ran away from Xie Lian, but he doesn't know Xie Lian kicked him away. Like, Xie Lian told Feng Shen to leave. It wasn't that he, like, asked to go away like Mu Qing did. And Xie Lian's like, I don't want to bring this up. Let's stop talking about it. But then Mu Qing says that everyone says you understand righteousness and can't bear to see someone's downfall, but it's excuses. And he's like, let's be honest, you just don't want to waste your time on a useless person. And that's why he gets punched. But that line there is not just talking about Xie Lian, it's talking about Zhan Lan as well. Because it's saying you don't want to waste your time on someone useless like Zhan Lan, like the woman he loves, and then he's like, punches him right in the face. It's like, oh. So that all makes much more sense now, why he got so violent. Because it was like a multi-layered insult. And then he tells Mu Qing, and they punch each other. And Xie Lian's like, you guys, please stop. Please stop. And he's like, who do you think you are assuming? He's like, you'd be happy if something bad happened to him, wouldn't you? You want him to be as despicable as you. Oh my God. And then, of course, Mu Qing's like, well, you've always looked down on me, but look at yourself. You're just as guilty. The pot calling the kettle black. And then, yeah, I like that they added so much weight to, like, the punches to make them seem like they are genuinely hurting themselves. And Xie Lian's like, what is happening? And he's like, how did it come to actual fighting? And I love that he just walks out of the palace. He doesn't try to break up the fight anymore. Xie Lian's like, I don't know why they're being this way. Like, I thought I raised him better. And they're the same age as him. It's just, God, it's great. It's wonderful. And that's when Hua Cheng shows up. That whole scene was everything I could have imagined it being. So cute. And Hua Cheng being so sexy and just being like, come and get him, boys. It's like, would let this Ghost King take me away. Would let him take me away. I'm like, Calgon, take me away. Hua Cheng, let's go. I'm like, I love it. And Xie Lian tries to like tries to step into the communication array and be like, it's okay, guys. I'm totally fine. And Hua Cheng's like, let me talk to these plebeians. Like, let me settle this. He's like, nobody's gonna come after me. You guys are all cowards. Bye. Let me and my husband have our time together. Thank you very much. So what's so interesting is that at this point, Hua Cheng, now that we know what we know about Hua Cheng, him like actively since volume 2 has been on to Xie Lian about his self-harm. And it's like, you need to quit. Like, quit hurting yourself. Even if you get healed, that doesn't mean you didn't suffer at some point. He's like, I care so much about you. Why are you doing this? Stop it. Right? And I think that's a big difference looking back, is that Junwoo, he doesn't really, there was a time in the novel where Junwoo was like, oh, Xie Lian, that's so common of you to hurt yourself, because Junwoo does that a lot. So that, you know, Junwoo doesn't chide him for it. He's just like, that's Xie Lian. Meanwhile, Hua Cheng is like, you need to stop doing that. And again, I feel like Junwoo, he needed somebody like Hua Cheng at the time. And Mei Nanqing could have been that person, but Mei Nanqing is not Hua Cheng. So we'll talk about that in the novel. That's novel talk. But in any case, we're going to the caverns after this. I love that that was actually a really good place for the episode to stop, with Yiming being sad and crying, because the Donghua only people are going to be like, what? And the novel people are like, ugh. So I have some comments I want to talk about before we end this episode. Some comments I want to go through that were brought up that I wanted to tie back in to this. SQQLBH314 says, now we know why he instantly came back to get Xie Lian. He was being informed the whole time by the puppets of Heshan. Yes, we know the puppets have been there constantly throughout the Heavenly Realm, feeding him information. So now we know not only through the dice, but how Hua Cheng instantly came back and was like, I gotta get Xie Lian out of there. That all makes sense. I like Sarah Linda. Sarah Linda was saying in their comment, she was like, you know, Pei Ming, what she was trying to say is that Pei Ming is a big shit stirrer. He just stirs the pot, right? He's the big spoon stirring the pot. I read her comment as being that Pei Ming is the big spoon. Which could be true. Could be true. Although I think if him and Yushi were in a relationship, she would be the big spoon. I think so. Anime Annie talked about how Xie Lian has rubbed off on Lan Chanchu with his tendency towards self-harm. And I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, the fact that Lan Chanchu hurt himself to like even the score to fight Xie Lian is a form of self-harm, and it's rubbed off from Xie Lian. So it's like, Hua Cheng's like, stop that. Quit it. Quit it now. Kix K talked about how Ming Yi is described as a phantom, which is exactly like the Blackwater is described. And in episode 4, they describe Ming Yi as a phantom, and that's what the Blackwater is described back in season 1. Lan Chanchu breaks his arm to fight Xie Lian, and it pans over for a second to Feng Xin, who, and I was like, oh my god, Kixie pointed out, when it pans over to Feng Xin kind of makes a look at Lan Chanchu breaking their arm. In book 2, volume 3, whenever Feng Xin like laid a hand on Qi Rong, he broke his arm as well. So there's like a connection there, and I was like, oh, that's so good. Like foreshadowing for a hot second, like the most subtle of foreshadowing, I tell you. Also, Red Geranium, I laughed so hard at this. Red Geranium, they noted that Feng Xin with Xie Lian back in episode 5 was giving off dad energy. I don't know if Red Geranium is a novel reader, so I didn't really say much in the comments, but I was like, yes, they are giving off dad energy. Feng Xin is literally a father to the fetus spirit. So yes, he gives off dad energy for sure, right? He's a daddy, he's a DILF. Feng Xin's a DILF, who knew? And then Maddock7754 talked about how Junwoo, it's not a wolf. I kept thinking it was a wolf on his sleeve back in episode 5, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's like, no, it's actually supposed to be a Chinese dragon that means ruler of all creatures. How fitting for Junwoo. How fitting indeed. Anime Annie also talked about, in episode 4, there was a discourse about the cannibals. And yeah, I remember maybe we talked about this in the novel, in the chapters. I would say, honestly, the episode 4's contents are probably, in all honesty, my least favorite of the entire series. And not that they're bad, they're just the least compelling to me. It's just like, let's hurry up and get to Ming Yi. Let's get to Heshan. Let's go. But they were talking about how there's a lot of controversy because people reading the book as well as watching the show were commenting how they depict the cannibals as savages, as natives, and what does it say about indigenous people. Now, before I go any further, I don't know if you noticed this, but I'm a white woman. So I am a Euro mutt. My background is like, it is all forms of European descent. I have no other trace of ethnicities in me other than just Euro trash whiteness. So I am not the source of reference to talk about indigenous people, nor will I be the voice to talk about such things. All I will say is that I do agree that in a fantastical world with ghosts and goblins and things like that, could you have made the cannibals look more like the Ghost City ghosts? You could have. Would it have taken away from the meaning? That is debatable, but it is not my place to talk about the controversy. I just wanted to point it out because they mentioned it in their comments. So, but this white woman ain't about to talk about indigenous cultures. I ain't going to put my foot in something that doesn't belong to me. So there we go. And then finally, I thought this really cool. Kix K pointed out that Ming Yi, their ponytail, the little spikes kind of look like coral, which is a little subtle foreshadowing to Heshan, the Blackwater. And I was like, that's really cool. I like that. And then Xie Qingshang talking about luck. The Windmaster says that they don't usually have good luck, kind of like Xie Lian. And that's a great callback to the idea that the Windmaster, technically, before they ascended, wasn't supposed to have good luck because of the Reverend of Empty Words, which we now know is connected to Jun Wu. And so I like the idea that both the Windmaster and Xie Lian have had their luck actually altered by people who care about them. For the Windmaster, it was altered by Shi Wudu, their brother, and by Xie Lian, it was altered by Hua Cheng, two people that care about each of them. So that's really cool. I like that. So yeah. I'm not kidding y'all. I did the math today. I was like, okay, I wasn't sure exactly where we would get to with this episode and what ground we were going to cover. And so I was like, this episode will determine where Qirong shows up. And I think he's going to show up in episode 8. And I'm like, rule of 8. My lucky number's 8. It's going to come out in Christmas. Oh my God. So that's where we're at. And now y'all know I'm freaking out. So yes. Oh my God. I can't wait for the next episode. I'm going to go back and rewatch this episode, take screenshots for Discord, do all the fun things. But let me tell you, I am so excited. I love this episode. I can't wait to hear your thoughts about it down below. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yes, I'll be back very soon with more Heaven Officials Blessing.